We have just heard a summary of the negative impacts of climate change here in Vietnam last year. Uh, it is quite interesting to see that in a relatively small geographical space, within 1 year, you can have both floods and droughts, and both exceedingly abnormal floods and droughts, and that because of the increasing impact of climate change. So I would say that Vietnam has experienced on its own soil the magnification of extreme weather events that comes with climate change, and hence the attention that is being given in Vietnam by the government, but also by civil society, by other stakeholders in Vietnam to climate change is very warranted and very necessary. Now, in order to avoid that those negative impacts get even worse, because they could, it is very urgent that we move Vietnam, but also the rest of the world, to a transition in our energy structure. We definitely have to move from last century's energy structure of high intensity of carbon in our energy grids, represented mostly by coal, but also by other fossil fuels, to an energy grid this century that begins to decarbonize slowly and in a planned way. Decarbonize taking first the high carbon out, first the coal, then using some medium term carbon intensity fuels such as natural gas for a certain period until we can move to 100% renewables, and that should be done by 2050. This is not a process that can be done abruptly. This is not a process that can be done without true planning, but it is a process that we must embark on. So to move from high carbon to low carbon, to move basically from coal, which is at one extreme, to renewables that is at the other extreme, passing through the intermediary fuels, is a transition that I would like to share with you. Most countries are already engaging in, as is Vietnam. I would like to point out a couple of the advantages of this transition. That is admittedly not easy, but is unavoidable. The first that I would like to point out are the health implications of the intensive burning of coal. I think your Mekong Delta is your national example of the consequences, health consequences of burning coal. But at a global scale, the Lancet Commission, which is the foremost health analysis report that is done every year, the Lancet Commission has just come out with its report pointing to the fact that last year there were 6 million deaths around the world that stem from air pollution, meaning that it is the highest beyond diseases, way beyond diseases. It is actually the highest reason for premature deaths is air pollution. Most of it, not all of it, but most of it comes from the burning of coal. So just for health reasons, in order to be able to breathe air that is healthy, which is important for adults, but frankly much more important for children who still have their development ahead of them, that is one of the very strong reasons why we need to move beyond coal. The second reason that I would like to share with you is the fact that it is simply cheaper. The renewable energies used to be much more expensive just 10 years ago, certainly 15 years ago, but they are now much cheaper than the fossil fuel alternatives. The drop in price continues to occur every day. Prices are getting cheaper and cheaper, and for any of you who know about energy prices, not in Vietnam yet, due to the market structure and due to the sun exposure that you have, but in other countries, the price of solar is already under 3 cents a kilowatt hour. which is beyond any measure cheaper than any fossil fuel. So the use of renewables already points in the direction of cheaper electricity prices in the medium term, but certainly in the long term. The third aspect that I think everyone can look forward to is job creation. The solar industry and the wind industry and all of the renewables are actually relatively new industries that are attracting and needing a lot of jobs, whereas the fossil fuel industries, just because they're incumbent and very established and mature industries, as you will understand, don't need the job growth that new industries do. That is just, a reality of any new industry. And to give you one specific example, China has decided to invest $300 billion into renewables over the next 2 years because it wants to create the 130 million jobs that they want to create with renewable energy on their territory. So there's a very clear link to the growth of renewable energy industry to job creation. The fourth aspect that I would like to focus on is the response to demand. More and more you have international companies, many of which are located here in Vietnam, who, because of the many advantages of renewables and because of their commitment to contribute to a better energy system, these companies that include Puma, Patagonia, H&M, who else is here? Puma, Nike. These companies have committed themselves to operations that are fully dependent on renewable energy across the board, certainly in their headquarters, but also in every country that they operate and that they manufacture it. And so these companies are looking more and more at the countries that allow them to be able to purchase renewable energy because they have this commitment, and they need very soon to be able to show, as Google and Apple have already achieved, that they are truly 100% renewable, no matter which country they're operating in. So the response to this demand for renewable energy is one that the world is looking at, but that Vietnam would also benefit from responding to, as it will be a growing demand in the near future. The fifth, I think, aspect that I wanted to focus with you is the fact that it is in the energy sector, in the family of technologies and fuels that allow us to have energy and certainly electricity within energy. The financial institutions are increasingly stopping their funding of coal, and in fact some even of the other fossil fuels, because of the risks that are inherent with those energy sources, because they are energy sources that, because of their negative impacts, which we've just gone through, but also because of more policy that is putting a pressure in particular on coal, but also on the other fossil fuels, those are investments that are in danger of not being able to keep up their value over time. So there are more and more financial institutions. Certainly the development banks have stopped paying or investing or even providing credit for coal. They are currently still providing some credit for natural gas, but that will also soon be brought into question. And many of the private banks have also begun already to stop their investment. And this should be something that Vietnam, as a country that has reached its debt ceiling, should be looking at quite closely, because Vietnam apparently will not be able to access credit from the traditional sources, needs to move to other sources, and those sources will be curtailing or have already curtailed their financing for coal. And finally, and perhaps the most important issue that I would like to share with you, is the fact that renewable energies allow a country to become energy independent. We all know that in the last century, the geopolitics of the world, but certainly the geopolitics of Asia, was to a large extent determined by the source of fossil fuels, which countries have coal, which countries have gas, which countries have oil, and the construction and protection of the transportation routes of those fossil fuels that needed to be transported from where they occur naturally to the countries that were importing. So first, there is expensive foreign currency that needs to be dedicated to the import of those fossil fuels. But secondly, obviously, anytime that you're importing fossil fuels from anywhere, you are caught within that context of geopolitics, in the context of the countries from which you are purchasing those fuels. Whereas renewable energies, by definition, are those energies that not only don't have a cost in the future, because I don't know any country that has received a bill from the sun yet or from the wind. So not only do they not have a cost, but also those are the energies that are present naturally in each territory. And I know that Vietnam is not among the top countries for solar and for wind, but it has a pretty decent presence of both sun and wind and hydro, and can use those as much as possible.